All right, Colin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Harry.
I'm excited to chat with Samir today, and I've already come up with a nickname for him. I don't know if he's trademarked it yet, but I'm thinking the network effects guy. So that's sort of a tease of what this episode is going to be about. So excited to have you, Samir, and talking a little bit about your bio. Sammer Singh, he's an early stage investor focused on network effects, creator of Breadcrumb.vc and Applied Network Effects, one of the highest rated courses on Maven. Both are globally renowned resources to learn about network effects. He's also now a venture partner at Speedinvest. Congrats, Samir, and part of the Atomico Angel Program, where he invests in early stage startups with network effects. Samir has 14 years of experience in the technology ecosystem, distributed between technology startups and investing. For much of his time, he studied technology business models and network effects in a professional capacity and via independent projects. So I'm excited to chat. How are you doing today, Samir?
I'm doing good. Thank you for inviting me, guys. And I've actually used the phrase network effects guy before
All
as an
right.
intro. It's a nice
I
shortcut.
think as I've mentioned before, and people might guess from my other business's name, the rideshare guy, I'm a big fan of just sticking whatever you like or whatever you're good at or whatever you're known for in between the blank guy, the blank girl. It just has a good ring. So just good bit of a branding advice there to start.
I thought you
Good
were
advice.
I thought you were franchising this kind of thing now. Is that
I wish I could find a way to make money off of this branding advice, but for now, I'm just giving it out for free. And I guess I'm gonna go off script for a second here and just ask you to start with what are network effects, Samir?
The
How do
basic
you define it?
definition, the textbook definition is that adding a user makes the product more valuable for all users.
Hmm.
The more practical definition is that the core value proposition of your product is an interaction that's created between multiple users of the product. So if it is a multiplayer interaction, which is the product, then you have a basis for network effect. Otherwise, you don't.
Got it. And what would be sort of the classic or one of your favorite examples of a network effect startup or industry?
I mean, the most basic one is social networks, right? They
Hmm.
formed the very genesis is a network effect. You allow users to interact with each other. Facebook was built on an interaction between college students before they sort of layered multiple interactions on. But I broadly put them into four categories: data network effects, what I call interaction networks, of which
Hmm.
social networks are a part, marketplaces, and platforms, which are far more developers sitting on top of a product, creating apps for those users.
Got it. Cool. Colin,
right?
you want to ask some get to know some of your questions?
Yeah, I'd love to. And I want to dig more into the network effects in a minute. How you know what they are, when you're looking at such early stage companies. But so first off, how many angel investments have you made? It sounds like you've done some prior and some with the Atomico Angels program. So maybe give us a little sense about that and what that is.
In total, about I'd say 15, 10 under the Angel program, and about five before that when I was experimenting and doubling.
All right. And then how many angel investments have you made this year? Do you plan to make?
This year, I've wrapped up. I've completed an angel investment that I committed last year. I completed two, in fact. I haven't committed any new ones this year yet. A lot of founders, I think, were hesitant to go out and fundraise Q1 of this year, seeing a bit more activity pick up in April. So I'm hoping I'll end the year with at least four.
Got it. And what's your average check size?
As an angel, it's about 30K GBP.
All right. So pounds.
Yeah.
I don't know that translation exactly, but
About 30, 35, 40K, I guess, USD.
okay.
Yeah,
Got
we're
it.
looking at 1.24 US dollars right now to pound. So doing
All
well.
right. And is that mostly UK startups, European? What's your
It's pan Europe. It's pan Europe. Just in terms of deal flow, I tend to get a lot from the UK and for some reason the Nordics. And there's
hmm,
like a smattering of German and French startups. But yeah, just in terms of thesis, I'm pretty agnostic as to where they're from within Europe.
Where are you based, Samir?
In London.
Cool.
and in terms of what you look for and what stage, tell us about that.
Well, stage theoretically is pre-seed and seed, but I mean that tends to blend into each other. In terms of what I look for, my first test is this startup creating a unique interaction in the sense that the way users interact on this product was not possible before or could not be done before, because every network effect is built on an interaction. If it's not unique, you're probably running into somebody else's network effect, and so that leads to some issues. So if you want to create a new network effect, you need a new unique interaction. The second part is, does that interaction then have the potential for strong network effects, which is where my frameworks come in. And then, do the early metrics suggest that the interaction is working? That doesn't mean top line growth. That means engagement and retention. And on the founder side, I prefer missionary over mercenary founders. And what that means is the founder needs to have some sort of relationship with the problem he's solving. He's come across it in his personal and professional life. And so the problem means something to him beyond just, I want to build a company. Because building a network is hard. And so if you don't really have a relationship with the problem, founders tend to pivot too early, or just continue to make pivots and sort of throw more stuff on the wall to see what works. And there's no real drive to get them to figure out how to make this interaction work.
Got it. I like that saying, missionaries, not mercenaries. So let's talk a little bit about your journey, kind of how you got started in angel investing. And then I'd love to know, kind of going towards today, we can talk about Atomico and your role as a venture partner. But how did you get into angel investing, and, why'd you start?
Long accidental journey. I originally sort of stumbled into the startup world because I was working with a family office in India about 10 years ago. And one of the sons of that family had built a keyboard app, which was sort of moderately successful. And he had this idea to build India's rocket internet to incubate companies. Turned out incubating companies was hard. So we started investing in startups instead. Learned a lot through that. And this is around the time when iOS and Android were, coming up. Smartphones were starting to become a thing.
What year was this?
2012
Okay.
in India. So 3-4 years after the iPhone was launched. So I started writing a blog about how mobile businesses actually worked, how these platforms actually worked. That blog got a bit more attention than I thought it would, and I ended up joining a startup called Atomico in London. Why London was sort of a long story. I didn't want to move to China, and the US visa system was not very friendly to people like me. So Europe was sort of a nice middle ground. App Annie was a company. It was a startup that essentially allowed you to track market data for pretty much any app in the world, and how many active users does Uber have versus Lyft or whatever. And at one point, pretty much every consumer-facing company in the world was using App Annie data. Since then, the industry has, I think, gotten much more competitive. For the last many years, I was their head of consulting, which basically meant a lot of App Annie customers didn't actually know what to do with the data. So my team would go in and say, hey, based on what your problems are and what we see in the data, you should build these features, not those features, and you should expand into those markets and not those markets. So it was kind of like an outsourced product GTM kind of deal. Turns out lots of App Annie customers either had network effects or were competing against them. And network effects are one of those topics that I was touching on when I was writing my previous blog. So I got deeper and deeper into it. Eventually, once I got my visa taken care of, left App Annie, I wanted to move back into venture, into investing into some way, shape, or form. I kind of liked that from my past job. I also knew I wanted to focus on network effects. Didn't know too many people outside of the head of research at Atomico, because he used to read my blog and he was a customer at App Annie. That was one connection. So started writing essays about network effects, and in the meantime just started dabbling with making a couple of angel investments. I didn't have much capital to deploy, so these were very, very small checks. That blog took on a life of its own, which was Breadcrumb.vc. At one point, Atomico reached out and said, hey, we kind of discuss your essays in our weekly team meetings. Do you want to come present some of it to us? And so I had an hour-and-a-half presentation with Atomico, and through the hour-and-a-half with the entire firm, nobody left. So that was a positive. And then after that, they said, hey, do you want some money? Which was helpful, because at this point, I was getting a lot of deal flow from founders reading my essays. I'd basically accidentally written an investment thesis over a year. What I didn't have was capital. And so Atomico took care of that. And so starting in 2021, I started angel investing almost full time, investing exclusively into companies with network effects. And then there's not too many people who focus on what I focus on. And so organically, I came across the Speedinvest team as well. and gradually collaborated on deals and ended up as a venture partner here.
Very cool. I sort of like how you kind of built your brand as the network effects and, kind of guy, right? As we talked about. And then, really you run into this sort of typical problem that I think I have run into. And I think a lot of others, like, hey, angel investing is a lot of fun. You get a lot out of it, but boy, you really need to make a lot of money to be able to do it for years on end and, 7 to 10 years to not see a return. So it's kind of cool. Can you talk a little bit about how the Atomico Angel program, I guess, works?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're right. Angel investing can become a very expensive hobby, and so it's best to not treat it like an expensive hobby. The Angel Program, in many ways, it runs like a very, very small single LP fund. Right. In the first year, they give you 100K. There's some ground rules on how you deploy it. The company needs to be based in Europe, or the founders need to have a key tie to Europe. You can't invest in gambling, drugs, or porn, which I think is pretty standard across most funds. And the check sizes can range from 10K to 50K USD. Outside of that, it's up to you.
Cool.
What you're comfortable with, what you want to invest in, and Atomico takes care of the paperwork and the back office. We just need to write up an investment memo and then submit it along with sort of a certain list of documents. So it's pretty low touch. It gives you a lot of freedom and it gives you capital to actually deploy. And a lot of folks also then graduate to what Atomico calls the alumni program, where folks that are active in the ecosystem get a bit more capital to either do more checks or do larger checks in the following year. So in my case, I've got sort of a total of $500,000, of which half of it I've already deployed. I target like 4 to 6 checks a year via the program. And in fact, even with Speedinvest, 4 to 6 is pretty much the ceiling of what I would do. Like when you have those many constraints on what you invest, like we want to do more focused bets.
Got it. And does Atomico only do Europe?
Atomico, I think, primarily does Europe. I think because I don't know exactly how it works, but I think a lot of European funds have it where if you have certain government investors investing into your fund, they mandate that a certain percentage of your fund needs to be invested into European startups.
Got it. So let's talk. I mentioned before I wanted to get into the network effects part, kind of like your bread and butter. Sounds like, obviously you become the guy, the resident expert. But when you're investing in like pre-seed and seed stage, there's not a lot of data most of the time, right? There's a lot of hopes and dreams and hopefully some traction. How do you, decide that there's a network effect such that you would want to invest? Like, how can founders identify that?
Yeah. I mean, there's a 2-step process for this. Step 1 is most network effects are built around the interaction, and the properties of that interaction really define what the strengths and weaknesses of that network effect are. So really what I'm doing in the first meeting with the founders, try and understand what this interaction, how exactly it works. And in fact, related to this, I'm launching a template next week where founders, as opposed to reading 10,000 words of essays, can essentially just answer a quick 1-minute quiz, and it'll give them a quick high-level assessment of, hey, your network effects are not particularly defensible, but they're fairly scalable in this case, or you might have a viability issue, stuff like that. Which it's
cool.
That's my primary lens of looking at network effects. In my case, I also only invest post-metric. So I tend to not invest at idea stage. I want to see early users using the product. I don't necessarily care about how fast they're growing. So for a social network, I've invested when they've got 5,000 monthly active users. At that point, you have enough data to make sense of it. For marketplaces, if you have more than 100 transactions a month, for a B2C marketplace, there's enough data to make sense of it. And so there's certain metrics I'm looking at. And the basic rule when evaluating the metrics of a network effect product at an early stage is activity needs to outpace adoption. Because the idea of a network effect is you add more users, the value of the product improves. If the value of the product is improving, then users need to behave in that way as well. They need to be using it more or need to be converting at a higher rate. So as a basic example, let's say you were evaluating a social network, right? Most social networks are one-sided. Essentially, it's a user posting, another user looking at that post. So the number of posts per user per week or per day, depending on kind of what the ideal frequency for the network is, should be going up over time. that gives you an indication that the network is starting to work, at least within the early user base. So number of posts per user and the number of views per user, or likes or comments per user, anything that denotes an interaction, the number of interactions per user need to be going up over time. Similarly, for a marketplace, it would be, for a high frequency marketplace, it would be number of transactions per user. And again, these are things that will not go up forever. They're going to follow an S curve. And by the time they get to the top of the S curve, the retention should look great. But the mistake people make is you try to look at retention when you're at the bottom of the S curve. Like at that point, the retention is not going to be great. That's the point. Because the product is starting to get more and more valuable at that stage. For a low frequency marketplace, it could be something like a search to fill ratio. The percentage of users that go in and search for something and then end up making a transaction, end up buying something. Because the more supply you have, the more valuable the marketplace is, and therefore users should be more willing to buy in that case. And so the search to fill shows you that. And from the supply side, utilization rate, what percentage of listings are getting sold. That also should be going up. Again, follows the same S curve. And so those are really the kind of signals I'm looking for. Depending on the kind of product, there's nuance in which metrics you would look at, which metrics you wouldn't. When you would look at retention, when you would not look at retention, how you measure retention. Like I'm a big believer in not measuring plain vanilla retention for networks. It's not just a user opening the app that makes a difference to the network. It's a user actively doing something that adds value to another user. And so that's what I call retention to core action. Let's say a user posting something, coming back the following week, posting again. What's that retention look like? And again, you need to kind of see that in combination with interactions per user and how that's evolving.
And in terms of like just overall, I know you look for network effects, but do you find that like it's sufficient to have a good business just to have network effects?
I mean, the core part of it is that you need to be solving a real problem. That's step one, right? So the interaction that you've created should be unique and solving a real problem. If you're kind of selling ice to folks living in Nordics, probably not a great business idea, right? So that's almost like the initial filter. Like when you're evaluating the interaction, is it solving a problem or not? If it is solving a real problem, and you can see the problem scaling, and that a lot of people have a problem like this, and the network effects are strong, and the metrics look right, and the founders of the machinery are probably seeing something close to a home run. Again, it's not guaranteed because founder evaluation is not an exact science. A lot of things can and do go wrong, but essentially you're maximizing the odds of finding a unicorn. And this is where my opinion gets a bit controversial, in that market sizing is not a thing for me. I tend to think of it as astrology for VCs, because it's not that market size is not important. It's your ability to estimate the market size is not important. Most people, if you were evaluating the market size of Airbnb or Snapchat at seed, you have to both be accurate and have your colleagues not think you're completely, utterly insane. And those two, it's really hard to square those two circles. Like you can be accurate, but then you need to take a massive leap of faith, which no one else, no other investors that you're investing with are going to buy. Or you need to say, okay, I'm going to estimate something that I think people will buy, but then you're not necessarily in the realm of accuracy. And so it's almost like an exercise in failure. Like there's no way you're going, unless this is a product being established, being created in a very, very established market, in which case it's probably not a very interesting product, especially for a consumer marketplace or network. You're not going to come up with a good answer. It's almost a great way of filtering out unicorns at seed or pre-seed. Like if you had to create a mechanism to filter out potential unicorns, that's what you would do.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some interesting network effect businesses. What's one recent one that you've invested in or sort of looked at carefully on the startup side?
My most recent investment is a company called Home Cooks, which is a marketplace to buy home cooked food from professional chefs or amateur chefs cooking at home. And the key part of the marketplace is that it is not local. These are not chefs that are around you. These are chefs spread across the country. And the moment you do that, the amount of selection you have just completely explodes. So you have pretty widely differentiated supply. And the food is healthier and cheaper than takeaway, and you have a better selection. And so that's a really interesting one, where it's both theoretically cross-border to some extent. Supply is fairly differentiated. which they unlock through sort of their logistics model, because the food is, they operate on sort of a consignment model, like real. Chefs cook in batches and deliver it to home cook's warehouse where it's frozen, and they take it out of the freezer and time it such that when it gets to a user, it's chilled, and then they can pop it straight in the fridge, and then you microwave it for 4 minutes and eat it. So that's a really interesting business.
Interesting. Is that operating in which country?
That's in the UK, right? So you might see some parallels in the US with Cook Unity.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting space. There's Chef and Cook Unity, and I think a few others. But so what was one thing that really stood out to you with home cooks, for example? Was there one thing that kind of made you invest, or was it a sort of series of checking the boxes of what you look for and kind of mentioned earlier in looking for startups?
It's more, if there was one thing, it was the fact that this was a unique interaction that was solving a problem. Getting access to easy, healthy meal is kind of hard. Like what you get on Deliveroo or Uber Eats isn't necessarily very healthy. You have recipe boxes, which are a massive pain in the ass because you effectively need to cook those. So I've never seen, like, the churn rate for those businesses is surprisingly high. And so there was definitely room for something that was high quality, cost effective, had like a wide selection, something that you wouldn't get anywhere else. And I think this essentially created a proposition to address that need. And of course, the metrics, there's things in the metrics I saw that I thought were compelling to me.
Got it. So just like one question I have is, I think you told us what network effects are, but I think maybe just as like a basic question for most people, like, why are they important? Like what do you get from them? Like, I mean, I get that they make the product more valuable, but if I was to, as a founder or, an angel thinking about a business, why are these more important than other things, I guess?
So there's sort of there's a series of reasons, and I kind of follow them chronologically. One is that they enhance your ability to scale, because if the product is getting more valuable over time, assuming these are the right kind of network effects, your LTV is going up, your CAC's probably going to go down, and so your unit economics are going to like massively scale if it's the right kind of network effect. Second, it gives you a very, very strong moat. And again, assuming these are the right kind of network effects, all network effects are not the same. If you have both high scalability and high defensibility, that's a recipe for a great business. And they're sort of well known as the strongest form of defensibility you can have for a tech business. And the good folks at NFX did some research there for us. They said that from what they saw, of all businesses that reached $1 billion in value since '94, 35% of them had network effects. It seems like a lot, but those companies accounted for 70% of the total value created. So just in terms of the amount of value creation that's happened over the last 25, 30 years, network effects have sort of been at the heart of them. And so even if you were someone who liked a pattern match, network effects are a pretty good pattern to match.
Yeah. So if I repeat it back to you, network effects lead to a defensibility, right? Which ultimately is something that if you want to make a sustainable long run business, you need to have defensibilities, right? To keep scaling. And that
defensibility and scalability. So in terms of your ability to scale efficiently, network effects will give you that.
Because it just lowers the marginal cost of acquiring a user, essentially.
Yeah.
Got it.
Very cool. So, Samir, before we get to our trending Twitter threads, there's one last thing I wanted to ask you about. I think I was in reading up on you and your bio. I saw that I think you mentioned you were fairly hands-on with a lot of the companies you work or invest in. So I would love to know more about like kind of specifically, sort of what you offer to startups in that way when you're negotiating with them. And then kind of if you want to share some more tactical examples of kind of how you've come in and helped.
Sure. So every founder I invest in, I give them the option of a 1 hour monthly call where we go over product metrics and GTM. Effectively, anything network effects touch is where I can be helpful. Metrics tend to be the heart of that because they flow into both your product roadmap and your GTM roadmap. So the first call always is, all right, what are the important things we need to measure to ensure that we're on the right track? And then we essentially look at those metrics and the product and the GTM in an iterative. If something is wrong and it's an early stage startup, something will always be wrong. as long as it's not fundamentally broken, we can correct that. So one of the examples is my very first investment under the Angel Program. It's a company called How About, which I think is easiest to describe it as a social calendar. So when I invested in them, so they had some clearly strong signs in the metrics, and they had some things that were broken. One of the things that were broken is only about 15% of users who signed up actually used it as a social product. Most people were using it as a calendar, single player calendar, and so the retention wasn't phenomenal at that stage. And surprisingly, that's actually pretty easy to fix. All you had to do was one, call out more strongly that this is a social product in your onboarding screens, in your App Store page, and add more friend invite buttons in the app. That took it from 15% to 85% over 6 months.
Wow.
And pretty much every other metric started spiking right after that. They've grown 40x over the last couple of years, and that was sort of simple hacks that that you can watch out for, simple things you can watch out for in the metrics to figure out how to improve this thing.
Very cool. So Colin, anything else you want to ask Samir before we go on to our trending Twitter threads?
Yeah, I think one thing I always like to ask is, if you could go back and do it again, all of your angel investing and everything you know today, what advice would you give people, or what would you do differently than you did?
Oh, good question. My journey was more accidental than deliberate. So I would actually say be more deliberate in focusing on one specific niche and creating a brand for yourself. It's like early on in my investment journey, I did come across shadier characters in the investment world, the underbelly of the UK tech scene, and you only after interacting with people like those do you realize, okay, you need to stay away from that, and like that is not okay. So one is staying away from that, starting with building the brand, starting with adding value, as opposed to starting with looking for a job or looking for ways to angel invest. I think that would be my biggest takeaway. When you create a brand, that then takes care of everything else, because when you create a brand around a specific niche topic, people reach out to you to ask about that or get help from that. So you build your network that way. You also build deal flow that way, where founders are reaching out to you to ask you to invest, or investors are reaching out to you to ask for your take on a particular deal that they're looking at. And so it almost flows into everything. It's almost at the heart of everything you do as an angel investor or a VC. You could also there's some people that go at it the other way, which is also viable, right? So if you're a super connector, you're probably going to go and meet a lot of people and sort of bootstrap your way using your position as a super connector. So it's really about figuring out who you are, what your strengths are, and whether they fit more in the super connector persona, or is it someone who builds a brand for themselves or has like a specific niche they like to focus on.
Yeah, I really like the sort of brand idea, sort of obviously with Breadcrumb.vc. I think you branded yourself really well there. And of course, all of your experience. I think Colin has done a good job on the marketplace side. A lot of people know of him as the marketplace guy, which I think he should brand. And then I guess the other option is super connector, right? You sort of just know everyone, you get out there. Do you think there's other ways? Like, I guess like I'm thinking about myself, like I kind of don't really have a brand when in stuff that I'm angel investing in. I know a lot of people. I'm like a little all over the place in angel investing. So I'm wondering now for myself, like, do you kind of, can you make it work if you don't have a big brand in angel investing or aren't a super connector, or are those the kind of the only two, best outcome paths you see?
It's a good question. There's probably a spectrum between both. Yeah. Between being a super connector and between having a brand. The less you are of one, the more you need of the other. Yeah. But at least anecdotally, and like I don't have a hard answer here. Anecdotally, I would say that the two extremes are probably the most effective ones. Yeah. So if you look at folks who have like a certain stature or are pretty successful at this, they tend to fall into one of those two buckets. But again, small sample size, so it's hard to say.
Yeah, I like that. I think you're definitely on to something. So that's something we'll continue to explore in the future. So speaking of building a brand, we've got a couple Twitter threads here, and I think this first one you might like. We thought it was a bit random, but now based off our discussion, I think it's quite relevant. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on the screen right now. And Colin, if you want to read it off, I'll give you the mic.
All right. And Samir, we just want hot takes. Don't worry about offending anyone.
I think Samir has had some good hot takes, right? The underbelly of London, I think, was one.
Well, I was like, man, we should
had a
have
couple others that I wrote down. So
we should have asked about the seedy underbelly of UK angel investing first, because that sounds like the episode right there.
Yeah, bonus episode.
All right. So this one's from Dolma. Do celebrities on the cap table really do anything? Does it materially boost distribution the way people claim? So Samir, what do you think? You got any thoughts here?
It's interesting. I can see it going both ways. I'm not sure it's a very hot take. I've seen certain cases where celebrities, when they have an actual interest in a particular business, when they can move the needle on it. And I've seen a couple of funds actually being spun out. There's Creator Ventures here in the UK, where one of the partners is essentially a YouTube influencer, so essentially a celebrity. And he helps with distribution. He helps with connections. But there's cases where, there's lots of celebrity investors that get access to lots of deals. And so put a little bit of money everywhere. I mean, in that case, it's pretty much just sort of a vanity name on the cap table. It's you've got a name and you haven't got much else. If you have direct involvement, if you've got some sort of, if they have some sort of meaningful skin in the game beyond just like a little bit of their cash, then it can help.
Yeah, I think the reason why I like this tweet from Dolma is, obviously there are a lot of celebrities that are kind of getting into VC. And, I feel like quite a few of the startups that I've talked to, we're pitching the chain smokers fund, or, we've got this person, or even some of the sort of business people who have become kind of mini celebrities in a way. And there's this kind of merging of influencers in media and VCs. And obviously every VC wants to be influencer in media and vice versa. So I think I like this reply here from Ronak that I'll put on the screen. And Ronak says 99.99% of the time, it's not going to work out like the founder thinks it will. Every founder should know this. Celebs should rarely be used as the primary go-to-market. And by the time they want to get involved, the company already works. Dolma says that's exactly what I've observed, helpful to corroborate. So, interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cases where it doesn't work. If celebrities are acting like a VC, without sort of any structure in place to actually help the portfolio, it's not really going to work. It's only in cases where they actually have that structure and all have a specific interest in one particular startup. That's when it can help.
Yeah.
And again, this is sort of scaling a startup that already works as opposed to making a startup work.
Well, kind of a random question, but have you seen any instances where a celebrity is not so much about distribution, but having them as part of the network increases the value of the network?
Depends on the product, right? If you have a network where that celebrity is actually a key cog or a key node on the network, then sure, I could see it. I could see that working. Examples would be something like Clubhouse, right? So essentially, Twitter. There's one that I recently did called Intro or Intros. It's like a marketplace for booking a 30-minute call with someone who's high profile, right? So in that case, celebrity investor essentially means they're going to be on the product. I mean, that helps. A Cameo, like that would be a perfect example of where a celebrity using the product massively moves the needle for it.
Yeah, very cool. So the last thread that we have, which I'll put on the screen right now, is from Francis Santora. And we just saw this one. To be honest, my most successful investments, I helped the least. They just didn't need it. So a little different than, I think other investors who are kind of getting in there and getting their hands dirty. So what do you think, Samir?
I'll put it this way. Most investors are generalists and can't really help much anyway. And so if they're helping, odds are that's not a great investment. Whereas folks that have like a specific area they can help startups with, in fact, the best founders probably have a way of seeking out those people, seeking out the right advice.
Yeah.
And so like you hear there's certain kinds of tweets and advice that you know is coming from a generalist investor.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I guess this guy too, he might be I don't, yeah, I mean, maybe he is a generalist too, but I've heard this from a couple angels that, so one of the things that they like is, giving them 25K and then, wiping their hands. And it's like, wow, if they bug me a lot, it's like, this is not a good sign, right? What did Kirk say on one of our earlier episodes, Colin, right? That if you get too many investor updates or not enough, it's kind of a bad thing too, right?
Well, Samir, you said something interesting where you said you offer a 1-hour call every month to your companies. Have you found that the people that don't take that do better?
Yeah.
Do they do worse?
Nope. No correlation at all. So my top 2 portfolio companies, one I speak to every week, one I never speak to. I get a portfolio update from them and I send them a WhatsApp message saying, hey, great month.
Yeah.
That's about it. So no real
both
correlation.
kind of feel good, don't they, Samir? Like, the ones that you're helping, you're like, wow, I'm doing a lot and they're doing well. And the others is like, I don't even have to do anything and these guys are doing great. I feel like both are kind of fun.
It's win-win.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Very cool. Well, Samir, we really appreciate you coming on, and we're going to leave links in the show notes to everything that you've got going on, your blog, Breadcrumb.vc, Atomico Angels, and also the venture partner role. What was the firm again? It was Speedinvest. Cool. Is there any other, if folks want to get a hold of you or follow what you're doing, is there anything else they should follow you on Twitter, maybe?
I mean, Twitter and LinkedIn work. You can also look me up on Maven. I run a course called Applied Network Effects there once every 3 to 4 months. So about 3 times a year. So if you want to get really deep into network effects, typically it's a group of founders, investors, and operators who are come there to learn.
I like that. Any parting words that you want to leave our audience with?
I can't think of one right now. I can't think of any right now.
All right. Well, we definitely imparted
Thank you guys.
a lot of knowledge.
Thank you guys for inviting me.
Yeah, I learned a lot, had a lot of fun. Thank you, Samir.